Okay.
Okay. Hey, let's get on with part two. Got the first subject matter I'd like to get into with you is you kind of touched on it earlier, like about training evolving. And I know there was a time in your training where it probably had to take a radical evolution, but you had a pretty wicked injury. So in general, I remember watching like Ted Arcidi bench 705 pounds, and the technique he used was lie down on the bench, bring the bar to like close to his clavicle and push it back up.
Mm-hmm.
You look at any modern day like world-class bencher, pretty much everybody has like technique that's somewhat dialed in, has totally changed. The numbers now compared to 20, 30 years ago are just astronomical. I'm gonna turn the mic over to you. If you could just give us your feedback on that, I think
Sure.
the viewers will find it really interesting.
Yeah. So one of the things you have to factor in, and this is the 800-pound gorilla sitting in the corner of the room when you're discussing powerlifting. I feel like it has to be addressed. And there's a big rift, there's a big schism in the powerlifting world between raw powerlifters and equipped powerlifters.
Yes.
I came up at a time when the only person that you would see at a meet when I was in my 20s, the only person that you would see at a meet who was bench pressing without a bench shirt would be some guy who was in the crowd who just got a wild hair and had an extra $40 in his pocket and decided on a lark to enter the meet. That would be the only guy you'd see, or just some first timer. But anyone, my entire career, who was taking powerlifting seriously at all, showed up in an Enzer brand powerlifting shirt at first, and then we moved on to the Karen's denim shirts, and then nowadays there's a variety of different companies that make shirts of different materials. So when you are talking about Ted Arcidi, it is important to note for your listeners, Ted Arcidi laid down flat on a bench that was narrower than any bench I've ever laid down on in my entire career. And he benched with a flat back with, frankly, terrible technique and ungodly powerful, super ridiculously strong man. Now, what Ted could probably do in today's shirts with today's techniques, very likely over 1,000 pounds. I mean, he was one of the strongest human beings on the planet at the time that he did that. So when you're talking numbers, and this is one of the things that really upsets the raw crowd, the people that really love raw numbers, they hate it whenever an equipped lifter like myself, hey, what's your world record? Well, my world record at 198 is 350 kilos, which is 771 pounds. And I did that in a bench shirt. There is no possible way I could have done that raw. I could have never done anything close to that raw. Right. That fact pisses people off. And it really pisses people off who are the strongest guy in their local gym. If you have a guy who can bench press, let's say 350 or 400 pounds raw, he's probably the strongest guy in his Gold's Gym or his 24/7 Fitness or whatever commercial gym he's in. He is super duper strong, strongest guy in there. And when he hears about someone benching 5, 6, 7, 8, 900 pounds, and they're doing it equipped, a lot of times he gets pissed off because what he really wants to know is, how does that guy actually stack up with me? Which I don't really understand that, because when I watch the Olympics, it doesn't bother me that I can't really compare myself to Usain Bolt or to Michael Phelps.
Exactly.
Me running doesn't look like the same species running as Usain Bolt. And as bad as I look running, I'm worse swimming. Like my difference between me and Usain Bolt in the run would be even worse if you compared me to Michael Phelps swimming, because I'd probably drown before I got to the other side of the pool. Because I bet
you can get to the bottom of the pool faster than him.
Oh, I guarantee you. I've been told that I swim like a beer keg, and it's true.
Right. Right.
So, anyways, I think that it's important for your folks to understand that. And so when people are talking about numbers, you got to bear in mind that equipped numbers are a different thing than raw numbers, in the same way that a high jump is different than a pole vault.
Right. Well, let me get a little glitch here in this phone. What's going on?
No worries.
Can you hear me, Brian?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So let's bridge this into like training tech. Like you mentioned that you can attribute some like advances in training methodology also to the not
Absolutely.
just your numbers, but a lot of the numbers that have been hit lately. So if you
So
could like, expand on that, that would kind of, I think it's a cool subject because it doesn't really get addressed too often.
I think it needs to be addressed more than it is addressed. So there are, broadly speaking, there's, in my opinion, there's two very broadly speaking schools of thought. The old school Western periodization idea, which is basically the Milo idea. I don't know how up on your Greek history everybody is, but there was a legendary figure from the ancient world called Milo, who famously or infamously, because it probably didn't happen, picked up a bull calf and carried it around the yard. And he did that every single day. And when the bull calf was a full grown 2,000-pound bull, Milo is still able to pick it up and carry it around the yard. Well, that's the basic idea of Western periodization. The problem with Western periodization is the same problem with the bull. Eventually, you can't just add 5 more pounds and bench it 10 times, and then 5 more pounds next week and bench it 10 times. If that worked, everyone would be bench pressing thousands of pounds. Okay.
Exactly.
And but that's the standard model is, if you bench press 100 pounds and you want to bench press 200 pounds, well, the next week bench 105, the next week bench 110, and so forth and so on. And then, a prescribed number of weeks later, you'll be bench pressing 200 pounds. And it works great on a piece of paper. The problem is in real life, the way that human physiology works, you will get stronger at something that you're doing that specifically for only 2 or 3 weeks at most. And then you will start regressing if you are doing the same exercise for the same number of reps with just increasing the weight. You will absolutely go backwards. The old school way of handling that is you would start off at a number and they would do these periodization waves. I'm a 200-pound bench presser. I keep adding 5 pounds per week until I can't add it anymore. And then I back off and I start the program over at 210. And then eventually I'm a 300-pound bench presser.
Okay.
That was the old school method that everybody that I knew came up with. I was very, very fortunate in my early days to run across Louis Simmons and Dave Tate of Westside Barbell and get exposed to the conjugate method, which for the years, I was a very strict Westsider. I did 1 speed day of bench per week, and I did 1 max effort day of bench per week. And then I split up squats and deadlifts similarly. But what I have found when I got older is that the speed or dynamic day for me was unhealthy. I ended up, I've had multiple pec tears. One of them was bad enough that it actually kind of made me internet famous. The most, I think the biggest social media post I've ever put out ever was either one of the world records or the comeback story from the pec tear, which by the way happened prior to any of those world records in the bench. I tore my right pec so bad that I had a bruise from my wrist to my belly button. And
oh boy. Yeah. You blew that one out pretty good.
Yeah. And it's the pictures are all still out there on the Reddit powerlifting sub. If somebody wants to look me up, I'm not anonymous on Reddit. I'm Bench Monster 74 and I am there as my real self. All my world records are on that sub as well, but you can see the healing progression. And what I decided to do was I decided to document the comeback story as I was healing up and ultimately coming back from the pec tear, which changed up my training protocol. So I no longer after that did a dynamic or speed day and a max effort day. Instead, after rehabbing, once I got back to full health, I started doing a volume day without emphasis on speed on Wednesdays, and then a heavy bench day on the weekend where we did dynamic effort. Generally, I would do a different type of a board press or some sort of a different variation of the bench every max effort day. And then on volume days, it's just like what it sounds, old school German volume training, lots of reps, lots of sets, trying to get as much blood into the muscle as possible.
Gotcha. What did your pec tear require any kind of surgery? Or was it all through like rehab and natural healing, etc.?
Rehab. I was fortunate. I did not have to have a surgery. I had an MRI done the next week. It confirmed the pec tear, but it didn't tear the tendon that was within the body of the muscle.
Gotcha.
And I don't. I guess I'm genetically gifted in pecs. I have very big pecs relative to most normal people, and so while I did have a big tear in it, I still had enough pec material left that I was able to rehab it and build it up. Although I've got a pretty gnarly scar on that right pec though.
Oh, I hear you, man.
Speaking of that, do you believe agree with something people say that if you want to be a very big bencher, then you need to have your pecs be so big that they cover like half your torso, or something like that?
It's helpful, but it's so dependent upon your genetics. In the same way that your biceps tie-ins are going to have a lot to do with how big your arms can get versus how much of a peak you can have versus mass. Mm-hmm. Your pecs are the same way. All of your muscles in your body have tie-ins, and how those tie-ins anchor on your body will have a huge impact on both the aesthetics of the way your physique looks, but also on the amount of mass and strength that you can have in any particular body part, because the longer your muscle belly is, the bigger your muscle can get, and it's exponential sort of thing. So an inch longer muscle belly, it doesn't mean your arms can get 1 inch bigger. It may mean they can get several inches bigger. So sure, those sort of things, they matter, but you can't do anything about it. So like if you're naturally gifted in having really big pecs and really big triceps, you're probably going to naturally be a better bench presser. But even if you're not born with great big pecs and great big triceps, you still need to do the same things as the guy who is gifted in order to get as much better as you personally can get.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
I mean, at the same time, you could look at the shorter a tendon is, I actually think the less force can be produced versus a longer tendon, which might mean a shorter muscle belly. Does that make sense?
The muscle and the tendon both have an action.
Yeah.
As a general rule, though, if you see someone who is gifted at the world-class level, they're generally going to have world-class muscle tie-ins as well.
Okay.
Here, let me share this with you, Brian. Like my I'm like an NFL like strict measurement, like under 6'2", maybe 6'1.5", something like that. But my wingspan is like approximately 6'7".
Okay.
So that caused, again, like being overly obsessed with the bench press as a younger athlete. I just think I actually went to the point where it's detrimental to my performance a bit. I experienced a lot of like injured, like pec tears, also very similar to what you described.
I bet you did. Yeah, with that kind of a build, that's a basketball player build, by the way.
Hey, it worked pretty good for playing offensive line.
I bet. No. The NBA did a study a few years ago, and literally every single player in the entire league, except for JJ Redick, had a longer wingspan than he was tall.
Right. Yeah, it does have its like, especially deadlifting. It was certainly an advantage, no doubt.
Right, but you're going to be paying a price for that on the bench.
Yes, the price I paid for my like blatant stubbornness was like I lost track how many times I had pec tears, pec blowouts, and I had one pretty. You can still take 2 fingers and basically touch my ribs in the center of my left pec. But yeah. So so separate subject. They're not separate. The next question I have is there's an athlete out there with like really long. How do you avoid a pec tear? That's what I'm trying to get at.
How you avoid a pec tear is, well, be mindful of pec strains. A pec strain and a pec tear are so close to one another. It is shocking. Now, the short answer for how to avoid a pec tear is don't bench press and don't max.
Okay, there you go.
You know, I have been aware of pec tears since I was a teenager. Some of my very early heroes from my 20s, when I first started learning about Westside, some of the guys that they were using in their videos at that time, within a few years weren't competing anymore. And a lot of times it's because, oh yeah, he was, you know, big time guy and he's benching 7 and he tears a pec and now he's done.
Right.
And so I personally was always very nervous about pec tears, and the way I avoided them for as long as I did is I was extremely careful benching raw. If I was not wearing a bench shirt, I very rarely maxed out. And every single time that I started trying to push my personal raw max, I would start tearing pecs. For whatever reason, I am born in with a physique that is such that the amount of weight that my triceps and deltoids can handle will literally rip my pecs off my sternum. And I proved it. And so what I did to avoid, so I had two choices. Once I got it strong enough to a point, because the thing is, nobody is hurting themselves benching the first day. You're not strong enough to hurt yourself at first. But eventually, after enough training, you can get certain parts of your body strong enough to hurt other parts of you. And when I got to a point where it was obvious that my pecs were not able to keep up no matter what I did to them, and my pecs look very impressive. They're big compared to my shoulders and arms, but they are not capable of tolerating the types of weights that, like, you know, I've done over 1,100 pounds for pin press lockouts in a cage, which is all triceps. You know, we're talking about 2 or 3 inches. And so I've got 1,000-pound triceps and maybe 400-pound pecs. Well, there's a pretty big gap between those two numbers. And so what I ended up doing, my philosophy was anytime I would go reasonably heavy at all, I would start getting into equipment to protect my pecs. What invariably would happen to me, and this is what ended up happening when I tore my right one really badly, I would suffer, air quotes, a period of time of really being very, very healthy. And when I'm feeling very, very healthy and very, very strong and very, very good, I get lax about safety equipment, just like anybody else does. And that when I tore my pec, I had already benched well over 5 in multiple different weight classes. And I tore my pec on the 3rd rep of what should have been 5 reps with maybe 225, 235. I mean, not very much weight, but I was doing speed reps. And I had felt a little tweak in my pec a couple of weeks earlier. Just thought it was a little twinge, a little tweak, nothing to worry about. Well, what it was a little tiny micro tear. And then a few weeks later, whenever my pec is feeling great, and it's a warm night in September or late August, got a good sweat going, and just, you know, one of the early sets of the night, boom, boom. And on the 3rd one up, I felt it tearing about 3/4 of the way up the rep. And I finished the rep, and my triceps tore through my pec. I mean, I know what happened, felt it as it was happening, is the pec is giving way and my triceps finished the lift, and I'm tearing my tricep, and I'm tearing my pec with my tricep power. And a lot of times that's not what happens. A lot of times people will tear them on the way down or powering up out of the bottom. So it's one of those things that you warm up, drink lots of water, make sure you're well hydrated. But if you're pushing the envelope, these things are going to happen. And if you're not pushing hard enough to where you're on the verge of something coming loose, you're probably not pushing hard enough that you're going to be at the world-class level. And that's the sad reality of it.
Well, yeah, to your point, you're talking to a guy with 2 patellar tendon ruptures, biceps, complete biceps rupture, pec, you know, multiple pec tears, hamstring blowouts, sartorius blowouts. I get it.
Yeah, and about 4 or 5 spine injuries here, probably.
Right.
I mean,
hey, we don't have a whole lot of time left. I really want to get into this aspect also. Brian, are you familiar with the old school powerlifter Vince Anello by chance? He was like,
Absolutely. Yes.
yeah. So we did an interview with him a couple days ago, and kind of got into what his training looked like, and the biggest difference maker between his training and most people's was like the psychological approach. He was like really big into meditation and state of mind and like that aspect. So none of his training was very, very basic, if you will, but his mental approach, which I've tried to like instill that in people. Okay, a lot of times, these fancy programs that float around become distractions to actual hard work. Like people say, what's one commonality that all top level lifters, whatever, say all top 20 list lifters have in common? They're lift
fucking animals.
Exactly. So I look at a lot of these programs that float around are really distractions from the nitty gritty. There's a lot of just, it's like poetry in motion, like avoiding the main subject matter, which is getting that weight in your hands or on your back, whatever the case is, and just brutally kicking ass. So Vince's big thing was like the psychological component to being prepared for a high level of performance. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that Vince has a point, but I think it is very, very dependent upon the lifter. Some people need a bunch of psych up and smelling salts and go and hit their head against the wall before they go lift. I've never been that guy. I see some people like Mendelsohn, one of the greatest, arguably the greatest bench presser of all time. He likes to have somebody just slap the shit out of him right before he goes up there and lifts. You do that to me, you better be able to fucking box, because we're going to have a scrap right there. I don't like that shit. So it's for me, I get in a very calm state of mind right before I lift. So I may, and I didn't hear the interview with Vince. I know who he is, and I've read articles of his, and again, I'm 2 handshakes away from him. They've trained with people that know him personally and all that good stuff. But what people think of as the mental game in strength sports and what the actual mental game is, in my opinion, are very different things. What most people from the outside looking in think of is the guy who's screaming and yelling, snorting, smelling salts, and then running up there and pulling a deadlift with his nose bleeding and still finishing. And that guy exists, and that's great, and more power to him. But for me, if you watch a video of any of my big lifts, you'll see me, if the video is long enough, before I lay back, and I'll be concentrating and I'll be getting my mind right before I lay down. And I've had people ask me, like, what are you thinking at that point? I'm not thinking in words. I'm thinking in images of trying to hit the perfect lift, kind of like a golfer will envision a perfect golf swing, or a baseball player will envision, the pitcher may envision the perfect curveball before he throws it. And then your body's got a better chance of reproducing that. So I think the mental part of the game is extremely important, but the mental part of the game that I focus on is showing up every fucking Wednesday and every goddamn Saturday when you have to put in that work, because all the psych out in the world on meet day is not going to make up for the training sessions that you skipped. And so
100%.
the grind, the ability to show up every day, to me, that's the mental game that matters, and that's what makes champions. Champions are the people that put in hard work every single time that it's time to put in the work, not just on the days they feel like it. Because I don't feel like it any more often than anybody else does.
Right, I hear you. Well, I think you probably relate to Vince's approach more than you might naturally assume, because I'll just give a quick summary of what he had to say. Was like, basically, the meditative state you get into is a very calm, relaxed state of mind, and much like you said, you're not really thinking in words. You're thinking about the level of performance or the achievement at hand, and he just, so you're capturing your mind's eye of seeing yourself in that future state of achievement, whatever that happens to be. And then when you're really, when you can see that moment occurring, you just kind of clench your right hand and like capture that moment in your hand. So
yeah, sports psychologists talk about getting into a flow state. I've heard people refer to it as that. If anyone's ever played basketball and they just had a game where just, man, everything they threw up was going in, or if you're playing baseball and you just get on a hot streak and the ball looks, as big as a softball and you just hit it every time. Those things I think are what they're talking about. And what I tried to do, and sometimes I was able to do it and put up some pretty good numbers, was get into that flow state. And maybe that is what Vince was talking about. And if so, then that makes me proud. I'm glad I stumbled into the same thing that great man did.
Yeah, quite similar. That's pretty cool. I'll tell you what, I think we're kind of ramping. Where are we on time, Matthias?
We have about 5 minutes left, maybe more. So I think we should wrap up with Brian telling us a little bit about how you overcame that massive tear. I actually texted the pictures of it to you, Corey, if you want to see it. How massive it was. He's purple all over on the left side of his body, because you did something. Speaking of the habitual construction and doing things you don't want to do day in, day out, you actually trained your pecs lightly every day.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what I did when I tore that pec, I already had a few decent skins on the wall at that point. And I realized as I was rehabbing, I was like, I may not ever be able to get back to where I was before I got hurt. Ultimately, I got back to where that was and beyond, but I didn't know that at first. So, I tear the pec. I've got a bunch of friends who've had similar injuries, and there's a bunch of people in this strength sport games that, like we've been saying, is no more than a couple of handshakes away. So what I did is I went and Google searched the Mark Bell pec tear protocol. And Mark Bell of Mark Bell's Power Project, he builds the Slingshot and several other products. He chased a 600-pound raw bench for years and years and years after having benched 800 in a shirt. And he ended up tearing his pec like, I don't know how many times, but I've seen the guy tear his pec multiple times on video.
Like 3-4 times.
600-pound bench. So he had developed a protocol for coming back. And so I followed what he did, and I added in something which I think was crucial. The short and skinny on the Mark Bell protocol is tons and tons and tons. And I mean like hundreds of reps with a broom handle, and then hundreds of reps with an empty bar after you get to past the broom handle stage, and then hundreds of reps with an empty bar plus 2.5 pound weights. And it's a very high rep, low weight, lots of blood flow into the area protocol. On top of that, I spent 4 or 5 days a week in a float tank, a very high density salt bath float tank, sensory deprivation tank.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
And I'd had a friend of mine that had torn his lat, and he swore by this float tank thing. He's like, I don't know why it works. It sounds like voodoo, but I swear I healed up faster. And so I swear by it. If you have a severe ankle tear or ankle gets torn up or any kind of muscle injury, it's worth a try. It doesn't cost that much, and it's non-invasive. And I was amazed at how quick I was able to get my range of motion back, how quickly I was able to get back underneath a bar. And if you go to my YouTube page, I think you can see within 9 weeks, I was back benching over 300, I want to say.
Oh, wow. That's pretty fast recovery, brother. Wow.
Yeah. It was much faster than anyone, including myself, could have predicted. And over time, I ended up exceeding all the numbers I had done up to that point.
Cool. Well, I'll tell you what, I think we're about at our time threshold, Matthias. And Brian, I'd like to do another interview with you at some point in time if you're willing, because I can think of like 100 more questions I want to ask. So
I'm happy to visit. Yeah, happy to visit with you guys. And I'm happy to talk to you about sports, politics, whatever you guys are interested in. One thing that we've not gotten into, I've also been a competitive marksman and archer for most of my life, pretty much alongside the combat sports and powerlifting stuff. I've also done quite a bit of that. So depending on where this is being aired and who's listening to it, sometimes that stuff interests people a whole lot because there's parts of the world that they don't really have access to that. So that may be what
Absolutely. Well, that's pretty cool. Any parting thoughts before we wrap this up, Brian?
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on here. You know, my parting thought would be find something you're passionate about and get after it. Don't sit on the couch watching other people live life and wishing that you could do something. If you got any idea that you might be interested in this, that, or the other, and you think it's too hard, that's your clue to know that you need to go do it.
Man, I think that's phenomenal advice. Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to wrap it up. God bless. Much love to everybody listening. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Again, my personal cell number is 360-939-7652. Any questions, comments, whatever, please hit me up anytime. And Matthias, any parting thoughts on your end?
Go on Facebook, look up the Facebook group called Dane Training Power Building. That's my group.
Cool.
Corey's in there too, and you can kind of follow along what we're doing.
Alrighty. Well, that's a wrap for today. We'll talk to everybody soon.
Thanks, guys.
You bet.